The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents Notre Dame and Jokes. Hi, my name's Matt Dillahunty, and I have to preface this because I realize that posting a video about a current events topic may get some people on the channel who are not normally here, which isn't the reason for doing this, but I'm glad if it happens. I'm a humanist, an atheist, a skeptic, and an activist. And primarily this channel is about the debates surrounding the God questions and other similar topics. I wanted to make this video because Notre Dame Cathedral caught fire today and burned. And I actually think that what I'm going to say is relevant to the atheist debates issues, because even though what happened today had nothing at all to do with religion, there are clearly people who are going to make it about religion. And by that, I mean people on both sides or many different sides. And one of the things that happens right off the bat is that there are people who make jokes about a tragedy like this. And I thought I'd take a few minutes to give my thoughts on the nature of jokes, when it may or may not be strategic, and what my thoughts are about this event in particular. So the first thing I'd like to point out is that I'm not the ultimate arbiter of what atheists should or shouldn't do. I have friends who made jokes about the incident shortly after it happened. Some of the jokes I thought were good, some of them I did not think were particularly good. And of course, there's always the jabs that go back and forth in a situation like this. Right off the bat, there were people like, oh, well, this is God punishing the Catholic Church for hiding child raping priests. I don't think a joke like that helps any of our efforts, especially while the fire is still burning. And it's for an atheist, it's kind of a stupid joke, because you're now basically saying, oh, there is a God and he's punishing the Catholic Church, which has you kind of arguing against yourself. And that's probably the pedantic portion of me is probably one of the biggest reasons that I didn't like it. It's worth noting that in the past, there have been attacks on churches. There have been attacks on mosques, synagogues, tabernacles, all sorts of things. And that is a very different set of circumstance. That is a human agent actively seeking out to destroy property and or lives of people who hold a particular religious view. The overwhelming majority of atheists that I've met and spoken with are vehemently opposed to that sort of thing, and they've even helped raise money to help rebuild some of these mosques and churches, specifically because we want people to understand that if we're having discussions and debates about whether or not a God exists, this isn't because we hate the people. It's not even because we necessarily despise their religion, although there's certainly going to be that for religious tenets that do harm to people. We are the advocates of religious freedom that are the ones who are most likely to fight to protect your right to believe what you want. We're not attempting ever to legislate your beliefs away, and I certainly wouldn't want to take it away by force or through harassment and property damage. This is just incredibly counterproductive, and the tiny handful of people in the atheist community who might advocate things like that, church burnings or attacks like that, they're not remotely representative. And I also felt that it would be hypocritical of me to not point this out, because quite often we will sit around wondering, okay, where are all these decent Christians who aren't taking the time to call out when other Christians do bad things? Where are all these decent Muslims who aren't taking the time out to call out other Muslims when Muslims do bad things? Because there isn't a category in which somebody can't do something that's bad. But there's a difference between attacks on those churches and things that ironically get defined as acts of God. And that is where the humor element comes in. And of course, it was one of the first things that people commented on is, oh, where was your God? Why couldn't God protect the church? And the thing to remember here is that in the Notre Dame incident, and by the way, the last report that I've heard today is that they've managed to save the main structure, but the fire was not out at the time that I was sitting down to record this. I've had no reports of any loss of life, so as far as we can tell, what we're talking about is a loss of property, damage to an incredibly valuable historical monument. And it's one of the reasons why I say this has nothing to do with religion, or it doesn't have anything to do with religion until somebody tries to make it have something to do with religion. But what you're going to see is, as things are rescued from Notre Dame, People are going to claim, oh, this is a miracle. This painting survived, it's a miracle. This statue survived, it's a miracle. And all that's going to do is prompt the atheist to say, that's not a miracle, that's not a miracle. Oh, how can you have your church burned down, but this one thing survived and claim it's a miracle? Where was the miracle that prevented the damage from the church? Those conversations are just going to happen. And they're going to rebuild Notre Dame. Now, I remember one time when Sarah Silverman suggested that the Vatican should be essentially taken away from Catholics and turned over to governments of the world to house homeless people, that this would be a better use of it. She's not in any way advocating for the destruction of the Vatican in this sense. She's talking about how we use our resources. And while if they rebuild Notre Dame, I would love to see it used in a much better way. I mean, it's a church, but it's also over 800 years old. It's a historical monument. It is significant. And its destruction isn't about religion, I'll say for probably 3 or 4 more times today. Its destruction affects real people. There are people who work there as their job. There's going to be, granted, we'll have an influx of construction costs from people attempting to rebuild it, but this is going to affect tourism. This has a real impact. But it's also property, not people. And so anybody who's feeling particularly butthurt because somebody made a joke about the Notre Dame tragedy probably should take a minute to realize that we're not laughing at someone's expense. We're not mocking a religion, while people are suffering. I was very happy that, as far as I can tell, there was no loss of life, that the firefighters survived, that the blaze was under control, and that there was genuine outpouring of emotion and sadness from people from all walks of life. I only saw a couple of jokes, and that prompted me to raise this discussion. By and large, what I saw from the rest of the atheist community was shock and horror and sadness. I have atheist friends who wept as that building burned. I have atheist friends who constantly posted how significant this is, how this is a great building and a historical monument, and there's loss of art and all of this, that they had always wanted to go, and now that they wouldn't be able to go and see it in its former glory, or that they'd have to wait until it's restructured. This is what people do. But people also make jokes. I almost made a joke, although it didn't have anything to do with Notre Dame specifically. Basically, when Vice President Mike Pence tweeted about the tragedy and said that they were sending thoughts and prayers to protect the firefighters, the first thing that popped into my head is, if thoughts and prayers worked, you wouldn't need the firefighters. If thoughts and prayers worked, you could just put out the fire. Yes, I'm not so obtuse that I am failing to realize that thoughts and prayers are the language that people use when they can't come up with anything else to say, when they feel helpless, when everything seems futile. Well, I can't actually dig in and help out, so I'll send you thoughts and prayers. And I didn't post the joke because I recognized that. And yet that was one of the first things that popped into my mind. Other people had done this, oh, this is God's punishment joke that I talked about before, and other stuff. And then President Trump, in another exercise of amazing stupidity, suggested that we fly tankers full of water over to help put it out. Now, if this had been the first time that he had pretended or thought he had expertise on a subject and just made a little goof like that, it would probably not be nothing worth commenting on. But at this point, he does that all the time. And so the first thing that popped into my mind is, not only is that a horrible idea because you have firefighters and people working in there, and water coming down in massive doses dumped from aircraft will damage the structure, potentially more than trying to put out the fire by conventional means might. It's just dangerous and stupid. But I really felt that it was lucky that he didn't suggest that they start raking their attic to avoid fires like this in the future. That is, in my opinion, a good joke. It doesn't diminish the tragedy at all. It picks an appropriate target. Someone, in this case a president, foolishly thinking they have a good enough understanding of this that they should make suggestions, who, as it turns out, is monumentally wrong about what a good course of action would be. Making a joke about that is sensible. It's not exploiting the tragedy. I'm not making a joke at the expense of the French people, of of the people who work at Notre Dame or anything else. I know that there are people who are suffering and sad because of this tragedy, and I can't really think of too many jokes about the tragedy itself that would be funny. But that doesn't mean there aren't any. And that's where I get to the thing I wanted to talk about. After big tragedies, especially when there's been loss of life, when the Twin Towers fell or something like that, jokes are going to happen. People are going to disagree on how long we wait after a tragedy before it's okay to joke about it. For some people, it's going to be never. For some people, it's going to be a few seconds after. That's a matter of personal opinion. And I don't think that there's any sacred ground when it comes to jokes. I do think that there's jokes that probably shouldn't be told for strategic reasons or because you're actually doing emotional damage and harm to people. And for the atheists out there who want to make this a joke or a joke about this in some sense, I'd ask you to consider what your goal is. Because if the goal is just to jab at religious people, congratulations. I don't think that's strategically wise. I don't think it's emblematic of and a good example of what a humanist would do. But you're free to do it, and those of us who think you are being shitty people will point it out. If the goal is to heal and add some levity to this, congratulations, jokes can do that. Humor is born out of tragedy quite often and is one of the tools that we use to help heal after something like this. But try to remember what your target is, what your goal is. And so if you want to tell jokes around this particular subject or any subject, consider what the target of your joke is. The Trump joke might be awesome. The Pence joke, maybe not so much. But jokes about, someone who actually works at Notre Dame who's now out of work or whatever, those are probably not good ideas. They don't do anything to really benefit anybody. So if you want to tell a joke, consider what the target of your joke is and make sure that it seems to be like a fair game target, especially if it's consistent with the goals that you want. Because the truth is, while this has nothing to do with religion, the jokes and the discussions that surround this are going to have a lot to do with people's perceptions about theists and atheists, people's perceptions of Catholics, Protestants, Jews, Hindus, Muslims, whoever is speaking and whoever they may or may not represent. And if you're the type of person who is likely to get offended by a joke or wants to rail against someone joking on a subject like this, then the thing that I'd ask you to do is to consider, do you understand what the target of the joke was? And is that actually objectionable? If you wanted to say, oh, Matt told a joke about the Notre Dame thing, and you were referencing my joke about Trump's bad idea, and the fact that we're lucky he didn't suggest that they should rake the attic, okay, but the target of that joke isn't the tragedy. And that's the point. The target of that joke is a tragedy, in my estimation, but it's not the tragedy. And also, we need to recognize the difference between churches being targeted and acts of God, for better language. We need to learn the difference between a tragedy that involves human life and something that's just about property. There's absolutely no denying that Notre Dame Cathedral is historically significant. It is incredibly important. It's survived over 800 years. It will be rebuilt. There were objects of art in there that may have been lost. Hopefully, the vast majority of them were managed to be rescued and saved. Yeah, there are plenty of opportunities for jokes. And by all means, if you're comfortable with it, tell them. Just be aware of the backlash that you might get and make sure you're targeting correctly. And when you want to complain about the jokes, make sure you understand what the target is and what the intent is. Because everything that might seem to be amusing or add some levity to the situation isn't necessarily an objectionable attack on somebody's religious beliefs. Those are going to happen. It's never going to stop. Well, maybe it will stop. I, for one, look forward to an end to religious beliefs that haven't demonstrated that they're true, which as far as I can tell is all of them. But I also recognize that that's unlikely to happen. And the way this feeds into the debate discussion, the teaching that I do on here and the efforts that I'm constantly involved in, including debates I did the other day, is it colors people's perceptions of who the actors are in these discussions. And what it also does is sets up kind of red herrings that can be dangled. Oh, well, you You think you have some kind of morally superior high ground, but you told this terrible joke about this. And now all of a sudden the discussion's about the joke. So for clarity, joke if you want. Try to make sure you have good targets if you want to be considered a decent person. Object to jokes if you want, and try to make sure that you're objecting accurately and not just, oh my gosh, somebody said something and it's too soon, too soon. Recognize that there are different situations and that what we say and how we act has an impact on how we're all perceived. And this applies to theists and atheists alike. And in the past, when churches have been the target of violence and vandalism, I know atheist and secular organizations have banded together to raise money to support the rebuilding. This is not that case. This is seemingly an unintentionally started fire based on the initial reports. If something about that changes from the investigation, cool. I'm not going to be donating any money to rebuild Notre Dame, even though I've donated to the rebuilding of other churches, because I view this not so much as a church, but as an actual product of a society. It's a tourism building. It is an historical building. And I think that there will be enough money between the religious and the governments to make sure that Notre Dame is built back perhaps even better than it ever was before. And so, yeah, an important building caught fire today and burned, and we lost property. And people banded together to try to put the fire out, and some people made jokes. It's all fine, and we're all going to get through it. And nothing that any individual does should be perceived as being representative of whatever category they're in. If a theist makes some silly claim that, oh, this painting made it and it's a miracle, it burned right up to the edge of this painting and it stopped. Okay, what about the painting that the fire went through? Just because somebody says something like that doesn't mean that every theist thinks that way. And just because an atheist jokes about this being an act of God doesn't mean every atheist thinks this way. We can't let jokes, levity, bits of humor severely impact our ability to have discussions. Am I sad that Notre Dame burned? Absolutely. I never got to go there. I haven't been to Paris. I would have liked to have seen it in its modern glory. I'd also like to see it once it's built. My ex-wife loves little white churches. We have a coffee table book full of little white churches. We've stopped at little white churches on road trip all over the place. It's about the architecture and the fact that these little white churches are cute. It's not about appreciating the religion behind it. And so I can look at Notre Dame and say, this is an amazing bit of Gothic architecture, and the stained glass is amazing, and the art that's inside of there is wonderful. I've been to grand churches similar to, though not quite as grand as Notre Dame, and I can appreciate them for those reasons. This isn't about religion. And the people who try to make it about religion on both sides, they're the ones that are screwing up. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye. This video is made possible by supporters of the Atheist Debates Patreon project. You can find more information and add your support at patreon.com/atheistdebates.